my kid's here, so I can't say anything too. How do I share?
Okay. What were the magic buttons? Jacob, what were the magic 2 buttons?
On the right, under the monitor. Under the monitor.
Oh.
Click 2.
2.
Then on the one that says smart board, click 4. 4. And then wait a second for the button.
I've got a slide where I talk about exactly this, about what keeps technologies being able to use crap is why certain great technology doesn't get used. I've got a specific point to make about this exact nest of cables up here.
Awesome.
I was expecting a better turnout.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Let me double check.
Don't say anything either.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, cool.
Yeah, if we could come
To your office? Yeah. Around 2 o'clock? Or a little bit before, I guess?
12.
Did you say 12 or 2?
12.
Oh, my bad.
What is this
contraption? I'll be hungry, but hey, I'll have a snack. Yeah,
I don't.
12 o'clock. That's your lunch?
Yeah.
Or
I don't know.
all right, cool.
Okay.
I'll see you then.
Okay.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Oh, there you are. We should really have someone else learn how to do this. I feel like every time I have to set things up, Jacob does it, but he'll be graduating.
That's because I will be
He's
graduating.
the only one who knows the room, though, so he's got to stay.
Then what will you do?
What will we do?
But I can't even figure this
We'll
one
just
out.
have everyone crowd around one laptop.
You know what? I'm gonna send you.
That'd be kind of impressive, though.
Well, so I'm HDMI, but I noticed it's VGA here.
Yeah.
So.
Trying to figure out, excuse me,
Get out of your way.
where to use.
Hello. We are, as you can see, still solving some technical difficulties. But I wanted to go ahead and just kind of start leading into things. Hopefully, we'll get the projector stuff worked out sooner rather than later. Hi there. If this is your first time with the ACM, welcome. We're happy to have you. If you're unfamiliar with who we are and what we do, that's okay. We're the Association for Computing Machinery. We are the Campus Computer Science Professional Development Organization, which means, of course, that we professionally struggle with projector stuff and other technical difficulties. Yeah, this is our last main meeting for the semester. The Wednesday following Thanksgiving break, we are going to be having a movie night. I don't know that we've confirmed what movie it is, but if you're curious, Hannah's the one you should bug about that. Hannah's right there.
It's probably because of your background.
We have pizza and lots of it. It's over in that corner, so feel free at any point. What's wrong with? What? Oh. Yeah, so we have pizza and lots of it over in that corner. So if at any point during the meeting you find yourself with a hunger for some pizza, go grab some pizza. Yeah. Another thing too is following this meeting, we're going to be having the ACMW. They're going to be tearing apart some computers, right? Yep. Tearing apart some computers. So if you love computers so much that you want to see every single one of them dismantled forever, come on, why not try out the ACMW? That is my ringing endorsement.
I have a question.
Yes.
What does ACMW stand for?
ACM, women, there are women in computing organization. But, yes.
I'm sorry.
But independent of the title, anyone is welcome to attend ACMW, especially people who feel like dismantling computers. Yeah, let's see. Also, what? Local Hack Day. Andrew, do you want to talk to us about Local Hack Day real quick?
Yeah, so December 2nd, we're going to have Local Hack Day. It's majorly hacking things. So it's kind of like a 12-hour mini hackathon that you can come basically just work on whatever you want. It's not as formal as like a real hackathon would be. So just come.
Yep, we can plug in here.
We're gonna be putting on multiple workshops and stuff throughout the day. We're gonna be sending emails out with all the information and stuff on it too. But it's gonna be from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. on December 2nd, which is Saturday before death.
So it is
What day was that?
December 2nd.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah,
Yeah,
interesting.
I think
I'm
it's just
still
because
not
of the
in, but
dongles. I don't know. Dongles are bad.
I'd be suspicious of this dongle, except like I said, I use it every day.
Came in, you're going to talk to me about that after this meeting. If you didn't order one and really want one, they are $18, but supplies are limited, so like, talk to me soon.
I don't know. Yeah, ben.myeres@oksafe.edu.
Anybody got a memory stick in their hand pocket?
Yeah, does anyone have a flash drive, thumb drive, anything like that?
Yeah.
You will save the meeting. Brady, savior of the meeting. Everyone, round of applause for Brady. If it turns out he doesn't have one, this will be totally premature, but that's okay.
Thank you. And I won't look at anything that's on there.
This one should be safe.
Feel free to come on in. I know there's not a lot of seating. We had a few more people show up than we were expecting, but please, if you can find a place to sit, actually, here's a mobile place to sit. Yeah. Again, pizza over there. Grab some pizza. Also, the officers have started getting together. Yes, feel free.
I just got this thing to light up, so let's see if that solved the other problem too.
Maybe. The ACM officers are starting to put together our plan for next semester, so if you can think of like anything you want to see us talk about or do, maybe guest speakers you'd like us to have, anything like that, please just let one of the officers know. For reference, I'm an officer, Andrew's an officer, Ethan's an officer, Colton's an officer, and Hannah's an officer. We are officers. Just you can contact any one of us with your ideas, or if you have stuff that you are familiar with that you would like the opportunity to talk to the ACM about, please absolutely let us know. We are absolutely wanting to know what opportunities we have available.
And we really want like non-officers to put on meetings. So if you have something you're knowledgeable about, we really do want to help you put together. We'll help and support you.
It'd be awesome as if you're.
Oh no!
Not now.
I don't have power. I don't have office. Wes.
What if we want to get added to the group meeting? When and where do we do
Wait, it stopped.
You can talk
It was
to
showing
any
my
of the officers.
presentation, right?
Yes. Okay. Just gonna do one little thing, which is that I'm gonna make our stream a little friendlier for everyone else.
Also, please sign in if you haven't. The sheet is somewhere.
There's a sheet somewhere. Find it.
Andrew, how much extra credit do you give?
You can sign it after the
That's a lot of people.
Yeah. All right. We need to get started, guys. This is William Thomas. He works for Cisco. What is it you do at Cisco?
So I've always been in for a long time been in sales engineering, right? So when we go and meet with our customers, Cisco does big corporations traditionally with lots of small companies. Obviously, OSU is a good customer too. And sales engineers are just engineers that work with the sales organization, engage with the customers to design products. So we call them systems engineers. I have some that are called consulting systems engineers because they're higher level. I'm specific in information security products right now, firewalls, all the stuff that goes along with that. My time in Cisco, I've been anything from a router and switch guy back when that was cool, back when that was still a new thing. That's part of what I'm going to talk about a little bit today. I did telephony for a while, so IP telephony when that first came up. That's another thing I'm going to talk about, kind of a big change in the industry that gave you these IP phones instead of crappy big Siemens phones that were expensive back in the day. And I'm going to apologize in advance. I never know how to do it. I don't know. I want to tell you guys like the history of some things and hey, remember when. I don't want to be the nostalgia guy. I remember when cell phones were this big and that kind of thing. But some of it's relevant, right? Because in a career, or whether you're sort of your personal career, if you guys get an idea, start a company, or you just have to be an employee at a company, it's like when change happens is when the opportunity is for your personal growth or your personal opportunities or your company to make money, whatever it is that you're trying to do. But anyway, all I said, I work for Cisco now for the last 20 years, which is an eternity. Before that, I worked for a consulting company where, well, let me go back. I'll talk a little bit about chronologically what I did, and I was kind of lucky, I think. I think I was lucky because I've been in a good place. I've enjoyed my career a lot, and that's sometimes you're in the right place at the right time, and sometimes you make a good choice at the right time. And so that's a little bit of what I'm going to talk about. So computer science major here at OSU a long time ago. I hate to, I'm sitting, hate to talk about years, but I was class of '90, right? So back when, for me, computer science was a lot of programming. It was almost all programming, right? Probably still, I mean, that's mostly what computer science is, I guess. But I went out and I did an internship at MCI, which actually I never got around to. I was going to make a slide with all of my history on there, and which seems kind of narcissistic, but so in the end I didn't do it. But so I went to MCI, which was changing the telephone industry, because even before me, it was a little bit ancient history when I came along. But Ma Bell, there was the famous Ma Bell. Bell Telephone used to be the monopoly that ran all communications in the U.S., and then they broke them up into all the Southwestern Bells, the AT&Ts, and all those kind of things. Well, MCI was the company that started that. They sued them years ago and said, hey, this is a monopoly. We'd like to own a business, because they simply wanted to, interesting the history of them, they ran trucks from Chicago to St. Louis, simple as that. And they had a hard time communicating with their trucks before, before cell phones and all that kind of stuff. And they wanted to do microwave towers along the way, basically precursor to how we use cell phones now. And they couldn't, because AT&T or Ma Bell was in charge of all that kind of stuff. And so they sued them, they won, they broke them up. Southwest Bell, all the Pac Bell, all those bells all came from that being split up. And when I came into MCI, they were still kind of monetizing that. They were just kind of, they'd won, they were starting to get customers, but they're a small guy fighting their way up. And it's kind of a fun time to be in the company. But I came in to be a network engineer, and by network engineer, they meant to work in like telecom networks, right? Which was to some degree a thing of the past. And I came in to do programming, and I programmed my way out of a job a little bit. They put me in charge of this thing as an intern, and I programmed it up, did a good job programming. I got to where I could do my job in a day and a half, and that was kind of cool, because I said, what's interesting to me now? It gave me a lot of latitude. And the thing that I got interested in was LANs. At the time, this was a big deal. But I'd sit around my cube, and I'd see these guys coming and going, having meetings, and they were wearing nice suits, and it seemed like they were having a good time, and they're in there with screwdrivers and custom equipment and all that kind of stuff. And I went and looked at what they were doing, and they were running LANs, but simply for the purpose of sharing a printer, right? So that's a little bit of what I want to talk about, is like economics and either people's needs or economics needs, or something in Maslow's hierarchy, right? Technology has to solve something, right? So in this case, everybody needed this really cool CAD drafting printer that was like $10,000, and not everybody could have one, and so they wanted to run a network just simply to connect that printer. And I raised my hand and I said, can I help with that? And I got me into communication. So I came back and I finished my degree in programming, knowing that I was really interested in communication. And so I went out and I went back to work at MCI. I set up LANs, connected. There's a theme I use in here sometimes called connecting the unconnected. Oh, that's weird. I have some change in here that I didn't. Well, that's interesting. All right. So I call this running towards change, right? I don't like to use a lot of words on my presentation. That's probably standing in front of it anyway. When I was at MCI, I came in and they were still using HP 9000s for this lab where they were tracking the parts that were failing from the field, and they're sending back to the manufacturer. Boring, boring, boring. But the fact is every time they added a new employee, they had to put one of these things, and they were like $10,000. And I just come out of school and I was reading PC Magazine, and I realized, why can't you just put a PC there? Why can't you use, in my time, it was DBase 4, which is ancient history now, but basically a really simple database that you could run on a PC instead of these ridiculously expensive computers, right? And you guys probably all have the history, the mainframe has gone the way of the dinosaur and that kind of stuff, but that was my little opportunity to go, hey, look, guys, you're spending $10,000 a tabletop for each one of these in this big lab. How about if I can, for $20,000, build a brand new system, port all that data over, and give it to you on PC-based systems, which PCs are more expensive then. They weren't as cheap as they are now, but they're still way cheaper than that. And that's where I got the opportunity. That's when I got a little bit of a career moment where they said, I like what that guy's doing, because I was saving the company money, right? And that's somewhere in here. Oh, there it is. There's only 3 things that matter to companies, right? If you work for a company, there's only 3 things that matter. Everything rolls up to this. You either increase revenue, you decrease cost, or you reduce risk. That's like I know there's at least one MIS major in here, but anybody else take a management class? I'm like, that's it. That's all companies do. They do 3 things. Everything else is just a fancy way of saying those 3 things. And so if you could directly decrease costs, then I was pretty cool for a little while in that company, right? Because it was a company that didn't have an IT shop there. They were telecom. They were busy with what we would call the core competency of the company, right? MCI was not about building computer networks and computer programs. It was about running this telecom and beating AT&T. And so I came in and I saw that was my first project where they kind of went, that guy can save us a lot of money. And I just slowly went through the company looking for ways to solve money. One of them was, this is a early Ethernet. Anybody? Do you guys have history of stuff? Is this like? Do you guys know what like coax Ethernet is? Is that even early? It's like, hey, old guy, yeah, so great. The Smithsonian called. They want your slides, right? But the point was, it was hard back then, right? Now you can just plug in. You plug in here. Everything's wireless now, right? But once upon a time, if you wanted to go connect something to the company Ethernet, literally this is called a vampire tap. This is a big thick cable, like kind of like your the cable that you run your cable box to, if you still have those. But it's a vampire tap because there's a piece of metal in there that literally drills into it, touches the copper core, and kind of clamps in place. And that's how this stuff worked. And guess what? That stuff broke a lot. So if you were the guy that knew, hey, the terminals in the warehouse, we can't ship product right now because they can't connect to this internet thing. If you knew how to go and fix a vampire tap, you were pretty cool. That was me. That was the college guy, right? Nobody else knew how. But all these changes happened. What was my point? I lost my point. All of these were basically connecting the unconnected. And that's kind of a tagline that Cisco uses now too. And I'll talk a little bit about the history of Cisco because it's, in your time, Cisco's kind of had its cool curve and it's now kind of corporate and big and bureaucratic and moves a little slower and everything like that. And it's not, once upon a time, it was like if you wore your Cisco shirt down the street, people go, hey, cool, you work for Cisco, because we were doing things, getting the internet going and really letting it take off. It was fun, right? It's still fun, but it was more fun then. Because we were connecting the unconnected, and that's, again, that creates business opportunities, because when you connect the unconnected, you can potentially save money, you can potentially reach new places, right? In my time back then, too, the idea of having a Facebook, live streaming a guy in Russia, or you had pen pals, right? Which, again, I don't want to be the old guy saying, remember stone tablets? They were great, but the fact is that technology changes really fast. And that's one thing you guys I don't know how you could appreciate how fast technology changes for you guys right now. And you guys changed, hey, last year we communicated using this app. This year we communicate using that app, right? My son, who's in the room, makes fun of his little brother because he doesn't use the same social media that he used just 5 years earlier, right? It changes that fast. And that's a world that you guys live in, right? So you have the opportunity to take advantage of that or understand it, right? And my last point, sort of a main point, is technology doesn't always, the best technology doesn't always win. I'm going to talk about why certain technologies won and what made them. And in my time, it's ancient, so I wish I could equate to use. But once upon a time, there was this networking thing called Banyan, right? Banyan was the first LAN that connected mini computers to mainframes to PCs, and it did email before there was email, right? It was like it did all this stuff way ahead of its time. It was run on Unix, so it was really stable. And the largest Banyan network in the world was the U.S. Marine Corps. They had like 40,000 nodes on this network, all connected, all communicating in a time when LANs barely existed and the internet was really an academic place. Dr. George was probably on the internet back then, but none of you guys were. None of your parents were, right? I wasn't saying anything about Dr. George's case. The internet was barely a thing. But anyway, so Banyan was a super fantastic technology that died, and it got killed by something called Novell. You guys stop me if any of this stuff is like either too easy or you're like going, what is Novell? But Novell was the next networking that became wildly popular. And it was easier to use. The thing that gave them an advantage, it didn't do as much stuff as Banyan, but companies were just starting to be able to consume all this change, right? Change didn't happen as fast. And so they didn't need all the innovative things that Banyan would enable, but what they did need is to be able to do it easier, because nobody knew about running these networks, and so sometimes easy wins. That's my point with Novell, right? And then they made a big name of themselves, and then they went virtually out of business, although I have a buddy that's worked there for 20 years. I don't even know how it's possible, but he just left there about a year ago and got replaced by this thing called Windows, right? So once upon a time, there was DOS, and then there was Windows, and then Windows wanted to talk to each other, and so Windows started having Windows networking, Windows servers, and they actually ran their own protocol back then, which I'm going to talk a little bit about Cisco and protocols. But all these things spoke different languages on the wire, even though they all might run an Ethernet, they spoke different languages, and that was a problem. Because all this stuff happened because we wanted to connect the unconnected, right? So Banyan was cool, and Novell beat them out because they were easy, and then Novell was kind of cool, and then they got beat out by Microsoft because Microsoft has business practices that let them squash their competitors. They had took a mediocre product and beat out better products because of their business practices. The other thing that allowed them to do is because they had a full suite of solutions, and I'd say that's another thing in business. Again, I'm sort of in sales, so sometimes I think about the advantages that certain companies have. You can have a really cool widget, whatever that is, but if your competitor has a pretty good widget, but like 5 other adjacent related products, sometimes that's a better solution for our customers, and I deal with that all the time. But anyway, but Microsoft won based on that because they had, they had Office, they had Excel, right? There was a better spreadsheet before Excel, right? All that stuff changed because easy and then business practices. So that's kind of the point I'm saying to you guys is business matters, business technology, right? I love technology. I love stuff for just the geekiness of it and making something work. But in the end, whether it's your personal ambition, your personal career, or a company that you either work for or startup, everyone wants to do a startup, and maybe you will, but there's going to be business things that matter. So I made this point earlier, and I think I'll come back to it. But the importance of history is patterns, not facts. And so I also had a history minor, and the thing that they teach. Does anybody like history? Anybody else into history? All right, cool. Did you have the teacher one time that suddenly made history seem alive, and you went from having to memorize all the English kings and what year the French Revolution is, and you had to memorize all those facts, and suddenly somebody made history interesting to you? Is that fair to say? Yeah, that's me. And over time, the interesting thing about history is seeing patterns, right? The same thing happens over and over and over, right? There's the cliche, history is doomed to repeat itself unless we learn from it, right? And so there's all these facts that they make you study, but that's not the important thing in history. If you stick with history, if you're into it, you realize that patterns are what matters. And that's true in human civilization, but it's also true in technology as well. So there's a lot of the things that we talk about, a lot of these patterns. That's why I take you back on this ancient history, and that you're going, hey, stone tablet guy, right? I get that. But the patterns that I learned in my career as it's going through will affect your career. It won't be the same thing, right? It's not going to be Novell. It's not going to be Ethernet, new ways to connect computers together, anything like that. But there's going to be something. I don't know what it is. You guys know what it is. I don't even know what they're doing today, right? I'm already sort of past my curve as far as learning the new things. I never did WhatsApp. I don't Snapchat. I don't even do things that you guys don't know. I hate to even think what apps are on people's phones these days. But what was my point? I lost track of my point. So, but the patterns of what happens is what's important. And again, that's why I'm kind of going back to the history here a little bit. And innovation is a catchy word. We all want innovation, but whether it's your business, my business is always talking about trying to innovate. We want to come up with a new product or new way of doing this or a new way to do it cheaper or whatever it is. But you have personal innovation too, and that's your career. That's that first job you get. That's you. Sometimes innovation for you on a personal level is simple as I have a job that I'm bored with and I want to do that job. How do I get that job, right? I mean, that's to some degree, that's your personal innovation. And some of these things we talk about a little bit are personal innovation, because like the thing where I went and I found that it was way cheaper to buy a computer and hook it to a cheap database than it was to keep going with these HP things. That was my personal innovation because I didn't want to be doing this anymore. I wanted to go get an opportunity to do something different. So this is my Mark Cuban story. So you guys know who Mark Cuban is? He's that dork on Shark Tank, right? He's a dork, and he owns the Mavericks, right? And he's a dork. But he doesn't think he's a dork anymore because he has billions of dollars. So
he's a dork. He starred in Sharknado 3, so that makes him a dork.
He still has dork hair, right? It's like, could you not afford a haircut now? But anyway, so I knew Cuban when he made his first $1 million, and before that, and some people I'm still friends with knew him when he was. This is his story. This is the one that he wouldn't like me to tell it this way, but he was the cashier. He was the checkout guy at a software company, a little retail shop, basically like a Radio Shack. The thing doesn't exist anymore. And there's this guy named Martin Woodall that used to come in with his cell phone back when there was, probably 100 cell phones in Dallas. And he'd come in with his cell phone, and he's talking about his business at closing time, and Cuban's vacuuming the floor, and he'd turn off the vacuum to let this guy talk on his cell phone, which still was a point of fascination that he had this cell phone because it was this big, right? And he would listen to what the guy was talking about, and then he would chime in. Cuban's kind of brash a little bit. He was a lacrosse player, I think, so he's got kind of a little swagger to him, but he's a giant dork, in case I didn't mention that. But he would chime into this guy and say, and this guy was selling software at the time to corporations, and Mark would chime in with ideas. He had an instinct, even though he knew nothing about selling this corporate software that Martin Woodall was selling, he would chime in with ideas. And that's the one thing that he has, is an instinct for what's going to work. So we started a consulting company, which is where I went to go work for a company, Micro Solutions, where that thing that I said I like doing when I was at MCI, where I like to kind of walk around and see the way they were doing things and go, I think there's a better way to do that. And I had a little bit of an instinct for that too. So MCI gave me the keys to the kingdom. I was basically a one-man IT shop because there was nobody else IT. And I would walk around and figure out better ways to do things. Well, I figured out I like doing that, and companies pay a lot for that. So I went to work for this consulting company that Cuban started and made $1 million. And $1 million is a lot of money. That's great. I would love to make $1 million selling something one day. But he went on to do even better. So he had a knack for recognizing the real-world potential for technology, right? And so sometimes that's one of the themes I have in here. I think my bullet is sometimes in technology we learn the what, right? Whether it's how to program or how to build this, or an integrated circuit, or we learn facts, right? We really focus on facts as a technologist, right? And we learn a lot of things. And I know my kid can sit here and rattle on and on and on. Either history or technology. He can go on and on and on about facts. But in the end, the stuff that's really valuable is applying those things to the real world. That's the theme I want to keep coming back to. Cuban had an instinct for that. So after he sold this company for $1 million, I think he actually made $2 million. Sometimes I call it $1 million, but I guess he paid taxes. And then he's a huge Indiana basketball fan. And again, this might blow your mind because of the internet these days, but once upon a time, if you didn't live in Indiana, you couldn't watch Indiana basketball. I know that sounds crazy, but it was true then, right? Because you had ABC, NBC, and CBS. That's what you had, right? Maybe you had some cable networks. Maybe ESPN would show an Indiana game a couple times a season, but you couldn't just pull it up on your phone with an app and watch whatever you wanted like you can now. So he figured out that people wanted to do that. Basically, he wanted to do that, right? He's one of those guys that says, if I want it, it's probably true that the masses want it, and that's where his instinct. He's not smart, right? He was I can't remember what his major was. He was a management major, I think, right? He's not. I mean, he's a smart guy. I don't mean to sound disrespectful, but he's not a technology. He's not a super smart technical guy, but he understands when something applies, when people want it, right? And that was a little bit his gift and I think it's not even that he's smart at that. He's just Joe average guy, and he realized that, hey, if I want to watch basketball games from 1,000 miles away, maybe other people want to watch basketball games from 1,000 miles away. And he jumped into a company called AudioNet, which became Broadcast.com, which got bought by Yahoo for like $5 billion. And that's how he went from from a checkout guy to a millionaire to a billionaire, just because he wanted to watch some basketball games, right? And of course, now you can stream anything across the internet, but he started that, right? He kick-started that thing. And not because he was any technological wizard, right? Then, the one thing I'd say, and I don't know, this is probably less of a point, but he's a little bit famous for, he made $1 million, he made $1 billion, and then he made another $1 billion, realizing that the stock market was overblown, right? There was something called the technology bubble, which, Cisco was part of that technology bubble back in the time when, and he realized, hey, the stock market is going crazy, right? It's like the tulip mania is a famous thing that business people talk about. Like when something just gets bid up, stocks are too high, everything like that. And he sold short, right? He diversified his portfolio. Those billions of dollars he had, he short sold, and he made another $1 billion as, I think it was 2002 or 2003, when the technology bubble burst. And we were in, at the time, you call it a technology bubble. I call it the field of dreams time, and I've got a slide for that where I talk about it, where the beauty is technology was so cool. The internet was changing things so fast, or really LANs, networks, of which the internet was one of them. But it was changing so fast that that people would just build it. I called it the field of dreams. I've got a slide. I could jump forward. I'm not going to jump around too much. You guys ever see the movie Field of Dreams, or kind of know what there's like the meme from Field of Dreams is if there's a line from the movie. So it's this crazy movie where they build a baseball field in the middle of a cornfield in Iowa. And they go, why are you building a baseball field? I don't know. If you build it, they will come. That's kind of the tagline. If you build it, they will come. And so they build that, and all of a sudden these famous dead baseball players come out of the corn, start playing games in the middle of the night, and they have life lessons to all the people in the movie, and it's a good movie. You should watch it. But the point is there's that metaphor of I don't know why I'm building it. I'm just going to build it, and if I build it, people will come. And in the 90s, and really right up until about 2003, that's what I call the field of dreams time in technology, where companies and people, and nobody cared. They didn't have a business plan. They didn't know how they were going to profit. That slide I talked about where there's only 3 things a company cares about, that rule was set aside for about a decade, and they just built it as fast as they could. Networks were that way, apps, everything was changing. You just build it as fast as you possibly could. And with that, with all that growth, came stock market bubble like we're in now, in my opinion, politics, but where we bid stuff up. There's no inherent value in the stock anymore. I mean, there's some value if you take, what's a company worth, right? Anybody who's a business major, you've got assets, you've got cash, you've got people, you've got intellectual property, you've got growth and future profits. However you want to value it, a business major can explain how much a company should be worth, shouldn't it? But what happens in the stock market is then we bid it up, and that's, again, where we are right now. Cuban saw that and short sold and he said, never too high and never too low. He's the kind of guy that's kind of enough is enough. And I saw a lot of people back then, as they got rich off of whatever company they worked for is getting bigger, that they would go, oh yeah, I've got $2 million in my pocket. If only I had $4 million. If I had $4 million, if only I had $8 million. And Cuban was smart enough to go, I have multiple billions of dollars. And he said, I think everything's overblown. And he made just as much money doing all of this that he said, predicting that the market was overblown, predicting, in essence, human behavior, and that the market was going to collapse, which it did. So I don't know if that's interesting or not, but I think that's good because a guy who's ridden a roller coaster, right? I mean, if you look at Mark Cuban's personal life, he went from checkout guy running the vacuum cleaner at closing time, a multi-billionaire, and he could have fallen off the cliff like the rest of the technology industry, but he was smart enough not to do it. So I'm relatively impressed by his instincts for the world. So Cisco, the company I work for. Anybody know Cisco? Okay. It's a relatively famous company in the history. Like I said, we become a little bigger, a little corporate, right? We're not as relevant to you guys or the internet. We're not the face of the internet, but once upon a time, 90% of the internet's traffic rode across Cisco equipment, right? So that was kind of a big thing. So where did Cisco come from? They started in 1984, which is really before my time even, but they really hadn't gone anywhere. They're kind of messing around with this one little box called a router, and they developed it at Stanford University. And the whole point of this box was, again, human behaviors. Like, why did they build this box, this little blue box, right? Because at the time, every computer system, there's these big computer systems that all had their terminals connected to each other. And there was a DECVAX that spoke a different language than the IBM, which spoke a different language than the Unix systems. And none of those talked to anything, right? So there was islands of technology, right? Which all the potential in technology was locked up. But they started connecting the unconnected, right? So Sandy and Lynn were these two people, and they were dating, right? So she works in one building, he works in the other building, and I wish I could send him a note to say, meet me for lunch at 12:30. Simple as that, right? Stuff that you guys all take for granted. I mean, most of us do now, but simple as that. And they said, we got to connect my computer system to your computer system. And they build this thing. It's called the Blue Box. It's in the museum in San Jose, the Museum of Technology, which is really good. Blue Box, where they just started doing, but they speak different languages too. So not only have to physically connect them, because everything used different connectors and cable types, but they also spoke different languages, just like the people of the world, right? So they built something they tried for basically the universal translator in Star Trek, right? That anybody can talk to anything through this box, right? Which was innovative at the time. And it was all because they wanted to go to lunch together and make goo-goo eyes at each other, right? So this is some of the early advertising, which is a little geeky. I kind of like it. I threw it in. But it shows two parents with their punk kid, right? So if any of you guys were a rebel in high school and your parents just didn't understand you sometimes, and it was a big deal at the time because TCP/IP, which is everything now, the internet. I mean, there used to be different protocols. There's not anymore. There is TCP/IP, but that was innovative at the time. Everything spoke TCP/IP, and whatever they spoke natively, Cisco equipment would translate it into IP, transport it to someplace else, and then translate it back into whatever that computer spoke, right? That was crazy, right? So Cisco wrote that, right? So if it's TCP/IP compatible, we can get through to it. We can connect anything. When they started the company, there was two things. This is what Cisco made, big and small. That was it. And eventually there was a medium, but it was as simple as that. And when I started the company, these were routers, but then they started making these things called switches, which you buy at Best Buy now for about $50, but they were big and complicated at one point. So we had small, medium, large router, small, medium, large switch, and that's when I started at Cisco. And Cisco wrote those 6 products, right? Basically 3 products in 2 sizes, or 2 products in 3 sizes, to literally the biggest market cap in the world. So briefly, the biggest company in the world from a worth the most. General Electric, which is into everything, is generally one of those companies. It's one of the biggest companies in the world. Walmart's probably up there too, although from a market cap. briefly, Cisco rode technology, which was unheard of, to be the biggest company in the world. And then the internet bubble burst, and we were no longer the biggest company, but all just based on connecting the unconnected, right? What's my point? My point is there's technology, and I can talk about what's inside that blue box that they kind of invented at Stanford, but the point is there was a reason that they built that technology. Nothing that they built, actually, frankly, there's still some arguments about who invented the router and did Cisco steal technology from Stanford, because there's all these people that worked on technology and made a widget and cables and stuff like that. But what they invented was the application of that technology, right? And so that's, again, one of the things is it's not just what you know or what you have or what you can make, but the how and the why. That's a tagline. Whenever I interview for a job, I always use that. It's not what you know, it's the how and why, or it's not what you know. How do I put it? Anyway, the how and why matter, right? And the how and why of Sandy and Lynn were they wanted to talk to each other. They wanted to connect all the different systems across Stanford, and they started a massive company. And that massive company, again, my point was Field of Dreams. These are the old guys that came out of the corn when they built the field in the middle of Iowa. It's a good movie. You should go see it. My metaphor is completely lost on you because nobody watches this movie. I'm sure it's on Netflix, so, or Hulu. But the point is, the other point that I bring that up to, the reason I say Field of Dreams is it was a great time to be in technology because they just built it. Companies would almost just hand you a checkbook. We need some of that technology stuff you have. Go. And it's fantastic. And then sanity came back and they stopped doing that. Right? And now you have to have a return on investment. You have to have a business purpose. You have to do one of those three fundamental things. You've got to, increase revenue, decrease costs, reduce risk. It's the only thing that matters. And the people who will get ahead, the people that you can make a good career out of, is if you're really good with a piece of technology, whatever it is, you be a great programmer, you invent a box, you invent an app, whatever it is that you do, that's great. But if you can turn around and explain to people why it matters to them, or first make sure that it actually matters to the average person, the way Mark Cuban did, the way he didn't understand the technology at all, but he had an instinct for what people needed, and what people need ultimately is what business needs, and he made a lot of money off of that. Cuban used to empty my trash can at night. It was cool too. He's a guy that's pretty humble. That I like that we'd be busy working at about 4 o'clock. He'd come around and be grabbing the trash can. And, you guys are so busy. Let me get the trash can and everything like that. And I liked a guy that was sort of humble. And even though he was running the company, even after he sold the company, he had his millions of dollars. And he was still running it for a little while. He'd empty the trash cans. He'd go drive the parts truck to pick up the parts because at the time we built PCs. That was still a thing. He would actually build PCs. And he'd show up with a keg of beer for the guys who were building PCs back there, and he's a good guy. So, phases of the internet, I'll talk about a little bit. So first, connectivity, just connecting things, right? That was first tick off. If you guys know the history of the internet, it used to connect, the government and the education for basically military. But once we commoditize it, that's the thing that everybody makes fun of Al Gore for him saying that he invented the internet, and I laughed and I mocked and I ridiculed and I still kind of do it. I hate to say something even positive about Al Gore, but there was a kernel of truth in that silly thing he said, in that they passed legislation in Congress that enabled the commercialization of the internet. And that's a pretty big thing, right? Again, it's how business, the internet technology had existed since the 60s, or most of it anyway. But what made this little TCP/IP network connecting governments into the thing that we all live on these days was business reasons and letting people make money off of it. Networked economy. So then companies started. I remember, once upon a time, I spent about 2 years connecting email systems. So this company could send an email to that company across the internet, which nobody used. Browsers didn't exist, so nobody was on web pages. But there's this network out there that if we just connect you to it, you can send an email to this other company. And you could make a lot of money out of that for a few years. And of course, now everybody can do it on their phone. And that's the natural progression, right? One point I'll go back to that Novell and the same thing I just said. And it's funny because I think of it as the Best Buy effect, is if you're in technology and if you constantly are running towards change, I think that was my line on one of my, look for the change and then find a solution to either drive that change or embrace that change. But if you whatever you're good at, right, and if you're good at XYZ, whatever the technology is, right, you're really good at it and you're the best at it and you're making a good career out of it, and if you ever go into Best Buy and you see XYZ technology on the shelf at Best Buy, it's time to learn a new technology, right? So that was something I learned along the way too, is you'd have these products that nobody had heard of, you'd make a bunch of money deploying it and solving problems for customers, and that was great. and then eventually it becomes so mass market that you'd see it at Best Buy. And of course, Best Buys are going out of business now too, but I think you guys still get the Best Buy metaphor. And as soon as you see your technology in Best Buy, learn something new immediately. Right now we're in sort of a phase called the Internet of Everything, where everything's connected. Now, if I don't run out of time, which I probably will, I think there's a couple of interesting stories. So, Internet of Everything is changing, this was again Cisco's tagline for a while, but there was a lot of truth to it. Changing the way the world works, lives, plays, and learns, which sounds really presumptuous, and it sounds like marketing wrote it, but there was a lot of truth along the way. I was talking to Dr. George about, I don't know if you can see this very well, this is called a telepresence, a health presence. It's basically a telepresence, just like this Polycom unit that we're on here, but it has all the medical instrumentation there and a video so that you can go, the problem is with rural areas, and if you're out in the middle of Kansas, you don't have good doctors, right? And if you have a stroke or a heart condition or something like that, there maybe there's an emergency room or a paramedic at the fire department, but if the real specialists you need are probably pretty far. Imagine the world, right? Imagine the third world and other places. Imagine the jungles in Bolivia and the places like that. They can't get healthcare, and the idea that you could connect skills to remote places through technology like that is actually an amazing opportunity. And Cisco kind of started this, and frankly, we didn't monetize it very well. It turns out the companies that make medical equipment, which is really expensive, they were better at taking this concept and monetizing it. So Cisco kind of started it, and and other companies actually do it better now. The medical industry changed and adapted to it, and they're better at it now. But we started that, and then we made these little cute little pods. These things, literally, that doctor can drive it around a hospital and walk in and do his rounds and see patients on this thing, and that's a telepresence unit. It's kind of funny. Telecom Economics. I was going to talk a little bit about that. What time is it?
It is 6:10.
6:10. And how long are all these people stuck here with us?
We have a captive audience for about an hour and all, so until about 6:30ish.
All right, I'm going to talk about, since you've got one in the phone, since you've got a Cisco phone right here, I'm going to talk about the beginning of the Cisco phone, right? Cisco didn't invent voice over IP, right? You guys, I don't know if you're not a communication guy, I'll offend some of you because it's so simple, but if you haven't done a lot of communication, used to be the voice was carried on dedicated circuits, right? And they would take 64K of bandwidth every call, all the way back to the copper wire days, which was strung across the country. That's how telephony happened, and that was communication at the time, right? Everybody needed a phone line. It was your connection to everything else. But it was really expensive. One, because Bell Telephone had a monopoly, but two, because the technology didn't change for like 100 years, right? Somebody invented the phone, and it basically didn't change for 100 years. And in the 70s, we were still paying ridiculous phone bills, having 2 copper wires running in our house, which you couldn't use the phone when there was a thunderstorm, because if lightning hit a pole, you would get shocked on your phone. That was the state of technology when I was a kid. It's stupid. So somebody figured out how to packetize voice, how to take it, something called it wasn't a DSP at the time, but take a CPU and sample that voice. I mean, you guys all have MP3s. It's the same technology that an MP3 is, basically, when you've gone from analog records to an MP3. Well, the same thing can happen in voice and the network. And so Cisco bought a company called Celsius, which has these little things. It's called this one's awful ugly, a voice over IP phone. And the cool thing about it, we said, hey, we've got this. We're gonna change the world because we're gonna let you talk over IP circuits, over the same circuits that you're moving data over, which are way cheaper than these voice circuits. We're gonna save you millions of dollars of money, and will allow you to put all that stuff on the same network and be more efficient in how you use your network. And that was pretty cool. And so we went out and tried to sell these things, and nobody wanted to buy them. And we said, man, this technology is fantastic. And what's the other thing that you need? You need to save money. And the economics are great. You can shut off all these expensive voice circuits, and you put everything in a packet and transmit it across your data networks. That's really cool. Why don't people like it? Well, this phone, I call it the ear warmer. Because the technology company, the IT department would say, that sounds pretty cool. We'll turn down these circuits. We push all these phones out. And then some executive secretary picks up this phone and puts it to her ear, and she goes, I don't like this phone. Why don't you like that phone? Because the power supply on this phone was right underneath the ear, like the cradle. And so it warmed up. It made the phone hot. So every time you pick up the phone, the earpiece was hot, and you put it against your ear, and it's just like, I don't like it. A simple thing like that, right? The human element of technology totally stymied this technology. So these phones just basically had to die, right? The other thing that happened is we forced the economics, right? So as much as there was a huge opportunity to replace all these expensive voice circuits with just data circuits that we can use more efficiently because of IP, AT&T said, oh yeah, we're gonna keep you going out of business. We'll take, our voice circuits go from this price to that price, right? They dropped them to 20% of the price over the course of a few years in response to technology. I call that predatory pricing, but that's what any company would do, right? If you're making a fortune selling something really expensive and somebody can do it cheaper, well, okay, I'm willing to drop my price down to maintain my market share, which is what AT&T and the other telephone companies did at the time. So that delayed voice over IP, right? So we had really cool technology that was stopped by the human element first, and then economics as people reacted to it, but we won in the end. So I like to get, there it is right here. You guys still have them. We make some really cool ones with a little high-def camera right on top of them, so it's like the Jetsons, which is another obscure reference that you guys don't even get. But the video phone from the Jetsons is real. I have one on my desk, and they're great, and we can sell them to you for $400 because technology is cheap, and the quality is fantastic now. But we went from all these companies, we put all these PBX manufacturers. These are huge companies, the Siemens, the Nortels, right? Has anybody ever heard of Nortel? It's a massive company, big corporate. I think maybe they're not completely out of business now, but they went from here to there because they didn't adapt to changes in technology. And Cisco went from a company that we had like 500 of these in a warehouse someplace that nobody wanted to I think we're like 70% market share for all the phones, that corporations use. There's cheaper phones, right? If you've got one in your house, you don't have this. But for corporate phones, it's a huge thing. But of course, now that's interesting. That's the other point I like from this one because, again, this is something I did along the way. But so not only did we replace the AT&Ts and the old PBXs of the world with cheaper, better technology, but then now we're getting beat by Microsoft. Again, Microsoft and their predatory pricing is they came in, they gave away Skype for a while. They gave it away to businesses. They came up with Link and Skype for corporations, and they dropped the price. They said, here's a piece of technology we have, and we want to control the customers. They're all about control. And so now even an IP phone like this is getting replaced by an IP client on a laptop, which fortunately for us still doesn't work as great as Microsoft wants it to work, but it's still pretty good. And eventually, nobody's going to use hard handsets anymore. Nobody's going to use a hard phone. We actually have some things where you can literally plug a handset in here so you can still kind of have the comfort of using one of these, but it's really just connected to your laptop. So that's changed. And again, my whole point of my theme is to talk about not a little bit of ancient technology that may or may not interest you, but what causes change, what makes technology successful, and what can make you successful as a technology person. That's what I'm trying to talk to. And again, my point about history is all of this stuff, these are facts, right? I'm telling you some ancient history facts from the museum, right? But the patterns don't change, right? So just like I was talking about history, this will happen for whatever technology that you dream up 10 years from now when you're off in your career, you will see the same pattern. These same patterns apply to you, even though the acronyms will change, right? Here's another great example. Cisco invented something, or didn't invent it. I think we bought a little small company and we productized it called a Cisco TV, and it was distance learning. Nobody did this at the time. What if there was a teacher in that city that wanted to teach a class in that city, right? Crazy idea, right? And everybody said that would be fantastic because a lot like healthcare, we don't have education. Think about like high schools where maybe there's small towns that don't have a big school and they have to drive a bus 50 miles to the local high school. I mean, that exists in Kansas, but it really exists in the world, right? So they said, we want to give you technology that will enable you to teach people at distance, right? There's a real world reason for that, and that's pretty cool. And we had some technology. It was okay, wasn't that great, but it was good enough. It's better than anything else that existed. And we tried to go to market with distance learning, and other people have beat us out, like Polycoms of the world. I mean, they don't necessarily make distance learning in particular, but we, to some degree, spawned an industry that Cisco didn't take good advantage of, and that's, that happens. But reason Cisco failed is, and I know you guys probably can't see these pictures, but we took this little piece of crap software application called Cisco TV, which worked mostly, kind of, usually, and we made this mega, biggie-sized telepresence unit. I don't know if you can see it, but there's 3 high-def TVs with cameras that are spatial sound so that it sounds like you're in the same room with people. We would specify, I don't know if you can see kind of the human element, but like we would have tabletops. Our technology, the screens, came with its own furniture because we wanted it to match, right? When you sat in this room, we would specify the paint in our rooms should be the same, right? The furniture should look the same, the chairs should be the same. And part of it is to play the trick on your mind that made you feel like you're in the room with people, right? Again, this is something that you guys have gotten more used to, but it wasn't that long ago. It was 10, 12, 15 years ago. This was unheard of, right? And so I literally sat in meetings where we'd be sitting there, we'd have a team meeting, and I remember a guy named Tom Tracy, and a lady walked into the Austin office to sit down. She was a little bit late, and there wasn't a chair. And Tom said, who's sitting in the Dallas office with me, got up and says, "Oh, here, let me get something for you, Lynn." And he stands up and he walks around the Telepresence unit like he's going to grab a chair. And then suddenly he realizes how stupid he is. I'm like, she's not really right there. That's a Telepresence unit. But it was that good, you know, and that was pretty cool. And we still use, our corporations use them. We use a lot of it at Cisco. We sell millions and millions of dollars of these really high-end Telepresence units, and they're really cool. But it turns out Cisco's a little bit greedy. Sometimes we like to make high profits, and we like to make high-end equipment, and sometimes we don't dumb it down. Not dumb it down, that's the wrong word to use. But we don't bring down the cost and simplicity so that everybody can use it. And so we kind of missed out. So we kind of own the high end of the market a little bit in Telepresence, but education, which, you know, there's never enough money in education, so we kind of missed out on education applications. That's why you guys have a Polycom, which is one of our competitors here. Can't even plug an HDMI into it, but, you know, I'm just saying. But it was so cool. It was like, and then we added a second row back here, but it was so cool because literally when you're sitting in one of these chairs, you literally felt like, I mean, you felt just like you, right? And to the point, it kind of introduced something in our company, which was kind of funny, because you would have people that you would meet over meetings like this all the time, right? And all of a sudden, you'd meet him in person, right? Hey, we all go to San Jose, whatever. And it literally was awkward. You walk up as simple as, "Hey, good to see you," or "Good to meet you." Is it good to see you, or is it good to meet you? It was like an awkward little moment because I've never been in the same room with that person before, but I feel like I know him so well, like I do. And I'm like, that was, you know, again, that's stuff that you guys are getting used to, but it's, you know, that's pretty new stuff. It was kind of cool, just that little awkwardness of good to see you, good to meet you. I just remember that, so everybody had to get used to that. So, great technology thwarted. That was my story of our early IP funds that eventually we won, but we got delayed a little bit. And I talked a little bit about, this was the state of oversimplified drawing. This is how corporations did, you know, and not to keep talking about corporations because I love education anyway, but in the end, what corporations need drives technology because these guys have the money, right? They have the money and the profit. So whatever works for a corporation, the rest of us get because those guys kind of fund the innovation that happens. But these companies had all these different networks to connect the different things they had, and they were all expensive. AT&T charged as much as they humanly could, and we broke it down. So this is something I talked about a little bit, but I wanted to show a graphic. You ever heard the expression crossing the chasm? There's a famous book called that kind of put a word to it. And it talks about any given technology has an adoption curve. So there's the early innovators, right? And I'm trying to think of what. I can't even think of a good metaphor. I wish somebody feed me one, right? Early innovators, something that you think is out there, like in the last couple of years. Oh my God, that's really cool. Nobody else is gonna.
Yeah, smartwatches.
Smartwatches, yeah. I was thinking about just like streaming, like getting the business model right, like Spotify, streaming music, right? Says nobody wants to own an MP3 anymore, right? In my time, so we got from where I don't want to own a disc anymore. I want to have MP3 because they're portable, and then now I think you guys, or at least my kid's younger brother, he doesn't want to own an MP3 anymore. He just wants to go to Spotify and listen to a channel anymore, right? So that's fundamentally changing that, right? But there's the early, I think we're probably just across the chasm there, but it wasn't that long ago, you know, there weren't that many people listening to Spotify or whatever the metaphor, or smartphones, or like the smart glasses. You saw the Google Glass, that kind of failed, I think, right? But this is, let me talk about the adoption life cycle. So there's early innovators, and at some point, something has to get across the chasm. There's this natural resistance, whether it's we haven't figured out the economics, the real world application, maybe there's some usability, there's something that prevents a really cool technology like that IP phone I was talking about from becoming big time. But there's a natural, you know, stuff will, you know, somebody have a great idea, you'll innovate, a few people will be using it, then it'll start to go mass market, and then it'll peak out, and eventually technology will start to, you know, maybe a record player. I'm using the same metaphors over and over, sorry for that. To eventually there's still people clinging to, you know, ancient technology, the laggards, right? But this is something the business school talk about, and every technology goes through this, right? Actually, a lot of things in life go through that, including people. But crossing the chasm is a well-known business problem, and it's especially applicable in technology, that you have a great idea and people start to use it, but then there's going to be something that stops it from going mass market, right? Something, and it could be the power supply making the earphone hot. It could be AT&T dropping the price of their voice circuit so it no longer was profitable to do this thing. It could be, I'm trying to think of what killed Google Glass, right?
the dorky appearance.
The dorky appearance, right? It was almost cool briefly, and in like San Jose, people would wear them with pride, but in Spokane, Washington, people go, look at the dork with Google glasses on, right? And it just never really got cool. And that's a trough of disillusionment, right? And this is a natural thing that we see in the technology industry. Someone come up with a great idea. Oh my God, it's really cool. You know, VR glasses. Actually, VR glasses might be a good metaphor. I need to think about this. You know, VR glasses, right? Which could change gaming. But at first they tried to do it so that you could travel. Like, I want to walk around and see the Taj Mahal through my VR lenses. And, you know, I'm like, okay, that's pretty cool technology. Well, it wasn't technically perfect. It's kind of expensive. And nobody really unlocked the economics of it yet. So that's, you know, that's a good one that the technology triggers happen. Everybody thinks that's pretty cool. But in the case of like Google Glass, they had to fall into the trough of disillusionment. That's what the chasm is, right? The trough of disillusionment is where, wow, it was really cool, but man, we just can't make it work. And that happens to a lot of technology, almost, maybe not all technology, but it's very, 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 very common. And then what usually happens is business people will come along and they go, man, that was a really useful piece of technology. And I saw, you know, this is where Mark Cuban finds things. I saw the potential in that, and I know how to monetize it, how to run a company to develop it, how to drive adoption in it, whatever it is that's holding it back, right? And then that's, you know, then that's the rest of the adoption curve. But that trough of disillusionment is where, you know, you as technology people, if all you do is think about how cool my piece of technology is, whatever it is, you get stuck here, right? And this is a great thing. These are people who own patents. They're people who are famous innovators, and all that stuff's fantastic. But whatever your great idea is, whether you want to change the world, whether you're going to feed children or drive learning into India, or whatever it is that whether you want to change the world or make money or have something or be famous at something, you know, some app that everybody uses, you have to watch it. You have to know how to get across the chasm. And sometimes business people need to come in and help you solve the problems to get across that. So I have one last point. So sales engineering, right? So that's what I do, right? Or did. I'm management now, so I don't know anything anymore. That's why I can't. My metaphors are old because I'm not an engineer anymore. But once upon a time, this is how we sold telephony, right? We'd come up with these VoIP phones, right? Hey, these are really cool. You're going to be able to consolidate circuits and save all this money. And one other thing that you guys might find interesting. One other thing that held back these phones when we first adopted them, and one of them was if you turn a voice circuit, traditional voice circuit, which used 64K held up basically, right? And we wanted to save bandwidth when we did voice over IP. So when you put it in a packet, we call it silence suppression. Like, hey, if I'm on the phone listening to my mom and I'm not saying anything, I don't need to be sending 64K her direction, right? That makes sense, right? A technologist would go, hey, I'm saving bits on the network. That's fantastic, and it is. Except it was off-putting, it's disconcerting because especially in old phones, and actually it's injected even in these phones now too, there's no reason you should ever hear static or kind of a buzz or that background noise in the phone. That's called comfort noise, right? And so when phones were hard things with copper connecting them, you had static, you had pop, you had all kinds of bad quality, and you could hear the other person breathing, or you could hear just kind of the silence and static, and you got used to knowing that that person's there. But you know what happens when we're on our cell phones now? How many times have you ever been talking on the phone, you're telling a great story, and suddenly you go, right, and you go, ah, God, and the call dropped 2 minutes ago, and you just keep talking, right? Yeah. That was one of the things that killed us at first, was we wanted to save bandwidth, but people were uncomfortable, so we started injecting, we had to inject noise, make artificial static, artificial background noise. So it's kind of cool, what the phones would do is if I start talking like I'm doing to you guys aren't making noise, imagine you're on the other end of the phone, this phone would listen to your background just enough that it would go, okay, I know what's happening on the other end. And until I hear her talk in the back of the room or whatever it is, I'm going to replay that on your end. I'm not going to transmit it to the other end. I'm going to save the bandwidth, but I'll just play it kind of in the back. It's called comfort noise. But that was one of the human things that held back the technology because people were off-put by that dead silence, the dead silence of not getting any packets if they weren't talking. Anyway, so this is a super geeky sale, and another super geeky thing that I couldn't. So my engineers, or when I was, I had telephony guys for a while. Something called a dial plan, right? Everybody's got your digits right, and once upon a time, you guys probably know the history. You got a 10-digit phone number. Once upon a time, an area code actually meant something. If it said 512, it meant the person's really in Austin. Now it doesn't matter anymore. But once upon a time, that mattered because that's how something routed through the network, right? So developing dial plans for corporations was like a voodoo science that you could make a lot of money developing a dial plan. And that's how we sold this stuff. We'd make millions and millions and millions of dollars selling, these really these gateways that were super geeky, how we would interface our IP networks to the local PSTN, and all this kind of stuff. And then it was all so easy, it was available at Best Buy that we couldn't sell it, we didn't have to sell it by the geekiness anymore. Then we started wanting to do video like this. We started wanting to use apps, like we have some collaboration apps and stuff like that, Jabber and IM messages and clients. And we started trying to sell, it's not just phone anymore, right? It's not just voice, right? It's not just video, but it's a collaborative experience, so you can instant messenger people. And I know that seems crazy, but it wasn't that long ago. Not everybody instant messengered all day, every day. And then we have some collaboration software called Spark. And we have all these things that it's a collaborative suite of tools. And so, again, back to how we would be, a Polycom at the time was like, hey, man, they've got really good video conference gear, and they do, and it's cheaper than ours, and that's great. So you could buy that stuff, except we've got all these other collaboration tools. So we can sell you a whole suite of things that are going to allow your people to work together. So again, a little bit like the Telepresence that would try to have the same paint and the same table, so that we kind of unlock the human beings. Technology should get out of the way of the human being and allow people to just have a meeting, because that's what you want to do. I don't want to make an H.264 video call to San Jose. I want to meet a person and have a meeting, right? And so it should be easy, not like this, right? That was one thing we had to solve. And we had to have a suite of things, so no matter how you worked, whether it's instant messengers or shared, co-editing a document or whatever, we had to provide the whole suite of collaboration utilities. It wasn't just good enough to provide dial tone anymore. And so that's what we were selling. And so in 4 years, I was manager over the, we called it the voice team, then we called it the collaboration team, because it started to not just be about voice, it started to be about video and these apps. And we went from that god-awful, ugly drawing, right, of a network. Actually, that's kind of cool. I still like the geeky charts. But this is what we started. Literally, this would be my whole presentation. Once upon a time, we'd go sell a client on all the different phones and how our stuff worked and what configurations looked like and how we're going to support you when you have problems, to just literally we'd walk in and say, this is what you want to buy, Mr. Customer. This is what you want. And we call it from the boardroom to the browser, which means whether you're using that super expensive telepresence unit that I was talking about down here, or whether you're on your phone using your apps, your Jabber app, which you guys all have, IM and voice and video on your phones, or your iPad or a computer or a little personal desktop system, it should all work the same, right? So you should have all of the tools, all the collaboration tools available to you all the time, no matter where you work. And so we used to talk about how now you can take that, like I live in Dallas, right? And if I had to meet with San Jose, sometimes it's 2 hours away, and sometimes it'd be in the evening, and I want to go to my kid's soccer game, and I'll be sitting on my phone having a meeting in the stands. And don't get me started about, I hate that parents are not watching their kids' baseball game, they're having meetings instead, but hey, at least I'm at the baseball game, right? But having all that stuff ubiquitous, no matter where you were, and then the fact that it looked the same, that it acted the same, and that if you had a meeting, somebody could barely tell the difference between the guy who was in the expensive boardroom and the guy who was on his phone. The only way you could tell was pretty much that you'd see clouds behind somebody. It's the only way you knew they weren't. But we call it that was our whole sales proposition. We took the technology, was completely out of it, and we sold millions and millions and millions of dollars of the experience. We called it the user. There's a guy named, our visionary, guy named Roland Trollope. He said, it's all about the user's experience. That's all that matters. All the technology behind it, it's our job to make that stuff invisible to the users and to the companies, and it's all about the user's experience. So from the boardroom to the browser, that was fairly innovative. Once we got to where everything was the same for everybody and you could use anything anywhere, all of a sudden this technology, we almost put everybody else out of business because that's what people wanted. All right. One last thing, I'm going to get my geek on a little bit too. I'm in information security now, and you guys heard of Stuxnet?
Yes.
I love Stuxnet because I'm also a history geek. I also I'm interested in the things that happen in the world, and the idea that somebody used a USB stick to take down uranium processing in the evil empire Iran and theoretically thwart them from coming up with a nuclear weapon that they were going to use to blow up Riyadh. Wow. I'm like, it was like, I remember when this came out and I studied what happened. It's like I got my propeller on my little beanie, started spinning, and went, oh my God, the geeks actually affected foreign policy and the world's stability with a USB piece of malware. And I thought that was absolutely amazing. I don't know what my point was other than I just love Stuxnet, right? And if we were going to have security talk, I can actually talk about how people like this story generally, so I like to tell this one. But again, patterns are what's important, not facts. And so if you're in information security now, whatever, how we did Stuxnet, which is interesting and gets people done, not we, the Israelis, right? It wasn't the U.S. The same thing that happens like malware that takes down hospitals. So I don't know if you guys realize this. You'll see it in the news these days sometimes. Hospitals are being taken down with malware where literally hospitals have to reroute. They'll go, oh, we're down. You know, we've digitized and put so much technology in hospitals these days because we have to, right? That's how you give more, better care. And just like everything else, technology fixes that. But because it's vulnerable, if you take all that stuff down, all of a sudden somebody can't record their, can't look up their medication, their drug interactions or their normal prescriptions or record things or things that I don't even know about the healthcare industry, right? We can't do that anymore because somebody used malware to lock up a hospital. And it happens all the time. You guys may or may not notice it in the newspaper, but I deal with this stuff on a regular basis. And the way they do that stuff is literally, it's this same stuff, right? The patterns are the same, right? And this is a little bit more technical. Really, this is a technical way that you attack and hack and own somebody. But the patterns stay the same. The facts, may not be a USB stick. It may not be Windows. It may, the command and control network that you tap into on the internet may go to Holland instead of Pakistan or wherever it is. But the patterns stay the same. And again, that's everything in technology. And here's another thing. I think this is going to be my last point. This is from what I do today, which is information security. Which, by the way, the important thing about information security to any of you guys is there's negative unemployment in information security right now. They say, it sounds like a tagline, but it's truthy, I'm sure. 1 million unfilled information security jobs right now. And guess what? They're really well paid. I have really well paid engineers in my organization that can tomorrow pick up the phone and get a $50,000 to $80,000 raise by going to a competitor or someplace like that. There's that kind of money in information security right now. And if you guys are within a couple years of graduating, something you might want to know, just food for thought. So, and here's the problem with the technology industry as it exists right now. And this is going to be my final point, I think. We make an amazing kinds of technology. We make endpoint security, right? So to do heuristics and behavior analysis, antivirus, is kind of blasé now. We don't do that anymore. We've got firewalls. We do application layer security. We do web proxies. We do all these things, right? And so right now, there's so much money in information security that there's all these little startup companies. There's 1 million companies, and there's so much investment in security right now. And all of these companies have something they make that's really cool. This is the old Chasm problem. All these companies, or most of these companies, are innovating, right? Try to pick out maybe my favorite competitor. I won't waste too much time on one of them picking out Splunk. Splunk's a good one, right? They haven't crossed the chasm. They have really good reporting techniques. They take logs from all these different devices and try to analyze them and identify bad behavior based on a collection of different of inputs, something from a firewall, something from an endpoint, blah 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 blah. We'll talk, but they're not across the chasm. That's their problem, right? And then some of these other guys, there's one called CrowdStrike in here, which I love these guys. They study. They're almost like info spies, right? They're a company that sell you an endpoint, but they study the bad actors in the world, right? And they name them. I remember there's one called Funny Bear, which is, I guess, bear is in Russian. But they study attacks and hacks and malware, and they look for patterns. The exploit and the particular application that they hack, those change. Those are the facts that change, right? But they'll have certain techniques, right? They'll hack in through a network to get there. They'll plant, something that's going to allow them to persist in the network, and they'll use that persistent state in their network to go out and scan for other things, find a target, and go after and do something with it, whatever that is. But that human behavior of what Fancy Bear does, I think I said Funny Bear, I meant Fancy Bear, that doesn't change. And so if you start seeing, if the other customer starts seeing, hey, somebody broke in and they did this and they did this and they did this, they go, aha, we've seen this pattern before. We can predict that they're going to do this next, and that's probably what they're after. And that's a company called CrowdStrike. I think that's just cool as anything because it's cloak and dagger stuff. But they're not going to make it, right? They're going to have to get bought. They're a really cool piece of technology that's not going to make it because customers don't understand that it's a great sales pitch. They don't understand it well enough to know how they're going to use it in their corporation. And the company's probably going to get bought or go out of business. They'll probably get bought because they're kind of cool. If they've got enough intellectual assets that they're worth buying, they'll probably get bought. But my point is, this is the security industry right now. And there's some big players like Cisco, Cisco Checkpoint Firewall's been around. IBM, they're a big player. Big names are going to be around for a while. And they're, like Cisco's got probably 12 different security products, and we make them all work together. That's kind of our advantage over these little widget makers, right? Which, no disrespect, but that's sometimes what I call the guy who's got a really great idea and a cool little tool, but it's in isolation, it's in vacuum, right? So that's the state of the industry right now. They're going to get, in the next few years, there'll be a wave of consolidation. So if you get out of school and you go to work for this widget maker, that widget maker, whatever, you may work for this guy or that guy eventually because they're going to get bought up. They're either going to go out of business or going to get bought up because we can't persist. We can't persist with the industry like that. And the reason is you have all those different capabilities, all those different categories, and there are different kinds of things I can do to combat hacking, right? But the problem is the more of those things that you buy, the more that our company buys, you increase your capabilities, the things that you can watch, the things that you can do. But the complexity is awful, right? And this is where the human and the economic element comes in, right? Call this the effectiveness gap. You can go buy everything on that page, and you still won't be secure because it's diminishing returns. You just can't get there because the complexity in time to manage it, the dollars to buy it, and then the human beings to actually make that stuff work is not working. So the security industry is critical. It's full of money right now, and it's broken. It doesn't work. It's not effective as it is. So it's a ripe opportunity, which is where I work right now. So it's a good time to be in that. So what Cisco's trying to do, this is kind of our sales pitch. So sorry, I don't mean to be selling you, but there's a real need for this, right? So we've got to get to where the complexity, where the capabilities go up faster than the complexity, kind of reverse that curve, right? But that's again, kind of the human, or not the human, the business element of technology. So all those people in that slide make a really cool widget, and there's a bunch of guys that go, my God, I make the coolest piece of technology there is out there, and they're right. But they'll either go out of business or get bought and run by somebody else in the near future if they don't solve real-world business things like that. And again, InfoSec is a little bit of kind of still the geeks domain, even within Cisco. And as much as I talk about that browser to boardroom, selling the user experience is how we sell some technology. InfoSec is still a geeks domain where it's got to work, right? It's got to be effective, and the attacks and the threats are dynamic. And that's the end of my pitch. I've got more stuff, but I'm not going to go there.
Thank
Thanks.
you. We absolutely appreciate it. If there are questions or ways to follow up, what is the best way people can get a hold of you?
I can give you guys my email address if you want. I'm going to stick around after class if anybody has got a thought or wants to go. I'll keep going, right? I'm actually in town for the game this weekend. I'm going to stay all weekend. I'll stay and talk, but I'd be glad. Anybody who's interested, I'll give you a business card and send me an email, call me, whatever, if you're interested in anything else. So my main point I was trying to talk about, the way businesses get successful and move forward is the way people do too. People in technology, right? Is you got to remember some of these things that those businesses that had good ideas that either failed or succeeded eventually, those are the things that you personally in your career are also going to have to overcome if you want to really go and be successful. So,
all right, thank you.
Thanks.
William Thomas, everyone.
I get going. I was like, oh man, I'm going to